Hello, and welcome to this KSPS election special. I'm your host, Doug Nadvornick. On the ballot in this November's election is Initiative 1634. It's a measure that would prohibit local governments from enacting any new taxes or fees on grocery items. And it would stop those same governments from raising any current taxes and fees on grocery items. It would not prevent the state from imposing taxes on groceries. Here to discuss the pros and cons of the initiative are two Spokane residents. Kevin Rourke is the owner of Bargain Giant Foods. That's a family business located in northeast Spokane. He's been in the grocery business for 42 years. And Kate Burke sits on the Spokane City Council. She represents the Northeast District. So let's start, Kevin. First, let me go to the ballot title before I ask you a question. The ballot title reads, "This measure would prohibit new or increased local taxes, fees, or assessments on raw or processed foods or beverages or ingredients thereof, with exceptions, unless effective by January 15th, 2018, or generally applicable." So it's short and sweet, but I guess it's not real easy to understand. Help us to understand what this initiative is about.
That's correct, Doug. The initiative, if it will pass, is really just an initiative to prevent taxes on groceries that are currently not taxed. There's nothing to prevent groceries from being taxed at this time, and this initiative is simply just to block that from ever being an issue in the future. So groceries are not taxed, non-food is currently taxed. As I understand it, would make no difference on non-food items because they're already taxed, but the basic necessities, the food items that are not taxed, could potentially be taxed in the future at the local level, and this is what this initiative is setting out to prevent.
So the backstory kind of goes back to the west side of the state. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The west side of the state, Seattle, enacted a beverage tax, and only on beverages, as I'm aware of. I can't speak exactly on how much its the impact has been on beverages. We already collect tax on beverages here in Spokane. I just don't see it as being an issue that is just confined to beverages. It's an issue that really is confined to the non-taxed items at this point. The non-taxed items, if you suddenly add a tax to them, if a tax were added, that's going to take money out of people's pockets. An 8.8% sales tax is 8.8% less money that a person has to spend on their basic necessities. And that would directly affect my sales volume at the store level. And really, we need sales volume. Margins are thin. You can't really raise margins to make up for a loss of sales volume. You need sales volume, and you need people spending their money. Repeat business and consistently. So really, my perspective is I don't want to see the consumers lose potentially 8.8% of their income that they would spend on grocery items.
So in Seattle, the tax is on sugary beverages, I guess as an effort to avoid obesity and that sort of thing. How much of your sales volume is in that kind of the Pepsis and the Cokes of the world and the
it's pretty
the sport
small.
Drinks?
Yeah, we don't do a lot of volume at our grocery store in sugary carbonated beverages. It's about 2%, so it's pretty small. Our sales volume is made up mainly of fresh vegetables and the meats and the grocery items, so the dry goods. Beverages just aren't a big concern in that area. Sales volume for us is pretty small. We don't carry alcohol and tobacco products. They're currently taxed, but we just don't carry them. So
for you, this is a taxation item.
Yes.
Okay. Kate Burke, why are you against this?
Yeah, well,
in fact, you were one of the writers of the anti message that's in the voters pamphlet.
Right. I think it's really important that as as people who vote in this community, they know who's funding initiatives like this. And I think if you look at the top donors of who's running this campaign, you'll see it's just the corporations that are selling these sugary beverages. And this initiative is just a direct reaction to Seattle passing a sugary beverage tax, which I am not for or against, but I do think that we need to make sure that these conversations are had at the local level with people who work for people, and make sure that we're bringing forward positive, community-oriented policies. So, in my opinion, and I respect our grocers and our local businesses that don't want this, because they might see taxes raise if this were to happen, but right now, we're not thinking of a sugary beverage tax in Spokane, and I think it's important that the voters know who's funding this campaign. It's not an initiative for the people, by the people. It's an initiative for the corporations, by the corporations, to make our decisions at the local level. And I just find that not helpful for our community.
I was going to ask about that. I was thinking in 20 or 25 years of covering news, I can't remember anybody at the local level, even when the city's budget was deep in arrears, talking about some sort of tax like this. Do you think that this would, I mean, if the economy slowed down, is that something you think the city would consider?
I'm not a fan currently with our current tax structure the way it is. The most vulnerable low-income people are being hit the hardest. And if you look at Seattle's sugary beverage tax, they have about 12% of people in poverty, and 14% of people in poverty are paying the sugary beverage tax. So they're paying more of a percentage, and so robbing Peter to pay Paul is the way I look at that. I'm not a fan of it right now, but if we do change our tax structure at the state level and have an income tax or something more equitable for the people, that could be a stream of revenue that we are able to find. I'm not interested in it right now. Like I said, I think it would hurt the most vulnerable and our local grocers. We don't want to do that at this time, but I do think it should be in the hands of the people who are elected, who know what's right for the community, to decide those things, not an initiative that is run by corporations. In my mind, it's a little bit confusing when you read that. It looks like we're going to want to tax meats and other products in stores, which this is just a direct reaction from the sugary beverage tax in Seattle. And so I just want people to know that before they vote to say that local government shouldn't have jurisdiction over this.
Okay. Kevin, help me understand how your store collects sales tax.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, let me
rebut Kate a little bit here?
Rebut Kate just a little bit. You only mentioned the top 3 contributors. You didn't mention the other dozen contributors, or dozen or so, that didn't contribute as much money. There are many, many, many contributors to this, though you mentioned the top 3 and the beverage companies. Mm-hmm. So you are correct. The top 3 put a lot of money into this, but you're not mentioning all the rest of the contributors
who
are
are
in
some of the other contributors?
And the other contributors, we've got citizens, farmers, local businesses, and community organizations. The Washington Farm Bureau is one of them, Washington Tree Food Association, Washington State Dairy Federation, Joint Council of Teamsters International Association of Machinists, Seattle Building Trades and Businesses, Washington Beverage Associations that we already know about, Washington Food Industry Association, Washington Retail Association, Korean Grocers Association. That's to name a few. Mm-hmm. So sorry for the delay, but that's...
So you're saying it's a broad-based coalition that is supporting this?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Just that these other associations don't have the big money to put into it. And this really has little effect on big beverage companies. They're not paying the tax. The consumers would pay additional taxes if additional taxes were implemented. It affects both you, me, all of my customers. It really doesn't directly affect the big beverage companies. Taxes will be collected from the people, and it takes money out of people's pockets. It doesn't take money out of the big beverage companies' pockets, though it could affect their sales volume just as it would affect my sales volume on grocery items if a potential tax were enacted. And right now, there's no guarantee that that will never happen. You can't guarantee it. Nobody in local government can guarantee it. This initiative 1634 will guarantee that it can't be enacted without a vote of the people.
Well, what about Kate's view that, you know, we shouldn't have the state essentially saying that local organizations, local cities and counties cannot enact a tax of their own if the state allows it? For her, it's a governmental issue. It's
a governmental issue. My take on it is let the voters make that decision. Mm-hmm. The fairest way, our system of voting, and it may not always be right, but it is definitely the fairest way.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, sure.
I think the voters have decided because they've elected the people at the local level, and so I think we're in good hands with the people elected. We're under immense amount of pressure to make the right decisions and to vote for the people and to make sure that we're in the best interest of the people. So you're right, this would preempt us to be able to enact a tax, but I also think that it's something to remember that at the beginning, yes, it would be a hit to the people if this were enacted, but in the long run, it would put out business for corporations because they're the ones distributing the soda. And I think we need to remember that when we're voting, because it's important to realize that when we wanted to raise cigarette taxes, the cigarette companies were not in favor of it. Big Tobacco is not in favor of it because they knew eventually down the road we'd see less people buying cigarettes. And that is what we're seeing now. So this could be a health conscious decision for our community with the high rates of diabetes we have, especially in District 1, that we see in the city of Spokane and all over throughout the United States. We are very unhealthy, and it's because we are initiatives like this that are run by corporations and trying to tell us what we should buy, which is sugary beverage taxes, and that it shouldn't be taxed because then they would go out of business or lose some money in the future. And so, I'm not for a sugar tax at all, and I don't think it's a good time to do it right now. And we don't have the stomach for it in Spokane. I don't think it's something that we want to even have a conversation on, but I do think that if in the future this is a route we want to take, we should be able to decide that as local electeds who are voted in by the people and who do live in this community on a daily basis and shop at the stores locally and see what this community is made up of. So I think it's important to realize we already have a democratic process that has been set in place, which is our local electeds. Okay. And
So Kevin talked about the other supporters of the pro side of the initiative. The anti side is the Washington Healthy Kids Coalition. What can you tell us about that organization?
I don't know much about that organization. I just know, I've worked with Vic a little bit at the state level on these issues. He is definitely a supporter of making sure that we have healthy children and adults to make sure that our communities are thriving. And I think it's important to realize that we've seen statistics of, because we raise taxes in other entities like sugar, cigarettes, we've seen less people buy those products at a younger age. And so if again, I'm not a supporter of a tax right now, but if it's something we look to in the future, we can have better outcomes for our youth and better outcomes for our citizens.
So neither of you are, I think, part of the statewide campaigns for the initiative. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So I'm just curious as to how you got involved in this. You were featured in one of the pro commercials, the TV commercials that have been airing, and I'm curious as to each of your stories as to how you got involved in this initiative.
I was approached as a small business owner by the committee, just simply asking if we would hang some posters in the store. Rosar's supermarkets were approached as well, among many others that I don't know the names of. So we got involved just hanging some posters. Then they came back and said, would you hand out some flyers? Then they came back and asked, would you be interested in doing a television spot? Of course, the more I read about this initiative and the more I understood it, I fully supported it. And so that's how it began. We did the television spot back in June, So I had the television commercial that was on most of the summer, and I think it's been airing again recently. And so since then, I've just done a lot of reading and gotten more and more involved in getting the word out to the public. So that's really my entire involvement, is just getting the word out to the public on what this initiative is about, what it's trying to do, and at that point, it's up to the voters to decide whether this is something they want.
Sure. So how did you get involved, Kate?
Actually, it's funny. I met Vic in Olympia.
Now, Vic is whom?
He works for the Child Obesity Coalition,
Okay.
I believe. And we were talking about, there was a little bit of talk last year during my campaign around a sugary beverage tax. I don't know if you remember that. Very small conversation that I don't know where it erupted from. And I was talking to him about how I don't support a sugar tax, because my citizens are of low income, majority, and I knew it would hurt them the hardest. And so I was explaining why I wasn't for it, and he was explaining why it could help in the future, which I see the outcomes from other taxes that we've done. But that's how I met him. But as I got more and more involved in reading about this and seeing who the bigger contributors were, I just want to make sure that the people understand that this is being run by corporations that benefit from our dollars, instead of local government that's elected by the people and that work for the people. And we have the best interests of the community in my mind, not the corporations. And I think it's important that we realize that as a community as we move forward. So I decided to sign on as a no supporter a few months ago, because I realized that the community should know what's happening with this initiative, and of course they should decide as well, and they should continue to decide our future, which is making sure that we're electing people who have the best interest of humans in our community.
Okay. Kevin, I want to circle back to a point that you made. I just want to make sure I'm clear about this. You talked about how these sugary beverages, just for lack of a better term, are not a big part of your volume. So how does this affect your bottom line? How does this affect your bottom line if this initiative fails, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Are you going to take much of an economic hit?
It really won't affect profitability and margins. It will affect sales volume. So sales volume generates cash flow. Of course, with cash flow, then you've got your small margins that we work off of. And any hit to sales volume really is a terrible hit in retail. You cannot make up for it just by raising prices. You can't raise prices enough to make up for a loss of sales volume. Ultimately, you'd end up going broke if you lost enough sales volume. Now, sugary beverages are a small part of our sales volume. Grocery products and produce and meats are huge for us. If a tax were to be placed on those items, that could be devastating to our business in terms of sales volume. People have less money to spend because part of it would be paying taxes. You take that much money out of the economy in products and services, people have less money. It's just going to be devastating. Now, it may happen and it may not happen. There's no guarantees. Local governments can't guarantee they'll never enact a tax on the grocery items. And that's really why I support this initiative, to prevent that from ever happening. I don't believe groceries should be taxed. They were taxed back in 1977, up until I believe about 1977, and we had to collect tax. And in fact, my parents, because I was quite young then, and I remember I had to collect tax at the register on groceries, and that was repealed by vote of the people, and I believe that should stay that way indefinitely.
Okay. I'll take that as a good closing statement for you. I'll give you one chance at a sort of a
Great.
closing and ending thing, and then we'll end the program.
Sounds
here.
great. And so I just argue that if this initiative fails, it wouldn't hurt any corporations or grocery stores, because we'd have to go through a process of putting in a tax. And I also, I do believe that this initiative is a fear-based tactic we're not interested in taxing any other products besides sugary beverages. As communities, I've never heard of any community wanting to tax food or other essential needs. So I do think it's a fear-based tactic to let the people know you need to be in control of what you buy and that make sure it's not taxed. But local governments are not interested in taxing essential needs. But there have been sugary beverage taxes, this is a reaction to the sugary beverage tax in Seattle. And I think that these type of decisions should be made by our local electeds who work for the people and know what's best for the community. So
thanks for a civil discussion. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug.
That's all the time we have. I want to thank Kate Burke and Kevin Rourke for their time and encourage you to learn more about this and the other initiatives before you vote November 6th. Thanks for watching. I'm Doug Nadvornick.